Hey, art nerds, we are going to be talking about our first principle of design, and that is balance. Now, up until this point, we have been talking about elements of art, and those are our tools that we use in art or our building blocks for each of our artworks. And those are our line, shape, color, value, space, texture, form that we've been spending the last few weeks talking about. Now, when we talk about principles, what we are doing is we are taking those elements of art and we are arranging them in specific ways to create these principles or create these really cool phenomenon, I like to call it, in the art world. And we'll be talking a lot about what balance is, how symmetry is similar but not quite balanced, and then showing you some artworks and some really cool artists that use balance in their work. So let's get started. First of all, balance, we refer to it as visual weight of art elements, okay? So we're not talking about physical weight where you have, 10 pounds versus 10 pounds. Visual weight is very different, okay? It can be with something being very big, a big object on one side of an image, or very, very light, small object on the opposite side, or maybe it deals with color. You have a lot of red on one side of the image, but then it's just solid white on the other. And so that's a very unbalanced piece, okay? So having sort of an even distribution of the art elements within a piece creates that sense of balance, okay? The examples that I have here below are great examples of balance, but not necessarily symmetry, which is something that you might be more familiar with. Now, we're going to talk about three different types of symmetry, and that is um, bilateral symmetry, asymmetry, and radial symmetry. So let's check some of those out. First of all, we have bilateral symmetry, okay? And the first thing I want you to notice is the beginning of the word bilateral. Bi meaning two. Think of like bicycle, okay? That has two wheels. So that's kind of like the connection I want you guys to make, okay? And that idea of two is extremely important, okay? Because when you have something that's bilaterally symmetrical, it is when a shape or an object is the same on both sides if you drew a line down the middle. So I have two examples here that are very different. I have a chair and I have a tiger. And these are both bilaterally symmetrical. And you can tell really easily when I put a dotted line like down the center of each of these objects, okay? If you folded this image in half, those two halves would line up with each other. They're mirror images or pretty close to mirror images, okay? And what I want you guys to note about the tiger is it's not 100% exactly, symmetrical. Like it's not perfect, okay? The stripes are slightly different. But a lot of things in nature, whether it's lions, tigers, bears, oh my, they are all bilaterally symmetrical. You and I are also bilaterally symmetrical for most cases. You got, an eye on each side of the half of your face, you got ear on each side, you got arms on each side, okay? So we could, essentially be like half and half and be about mirror images on each side, okay? We're not perfect, okay? But in nature, you find bilaterally symmetrical things extremely often. Secondly, we're going to be talking about radial symmetry, okay? Radial symmetry is when you have symmetry, okay, or that balance, okay, around a central axis, okay? And I have two examples right here. I have a starfish and I have a tulip flower. And when I talk about the central axis, I imagine like a red dot in the center of an object, okay? And from that dot radiates these lines that sort of divide it in half and then in half again and then a half again. And each of these sections, okay, I'll just call them like pizza slices because that's what they look like, okay? But each of these pizza slices are about the same, okay? They're really close to the same. Like you could almost rotate each of these items, not all the way around, but like, each, rotate it partially and it could almost line up. So I take the starfish, turn it a bit, and then the one arm would line up over the other one. Turn it a little bit more and then it'll line up again. Turn a little bit more and it'll line up again. And that's what makes radial symmetry really special, okay? Radial symmetry in items is often accompanied by bilateral symmetry. So I could probably draw a line straight down the middle of each of these items and I could fold it and it's, lines up pretty well. Radial symmetry takes it a step further and you now have the ability to rotate it a little bit, a little bit. You have that rotational symmetry as well, okay? Think of like a bicycle, okay? Or even just an actual pizza. You're able to rotate it and it lines up pretty close. And we'll show you a really good example later on when we talk about some of our really famous artists. We got some cool rose window in Notre Dame coming up here. Now, speaking of radial art, okay, I stumbled upon this and I thought it was super, super cool, okay? Um, we have fish that create radial designs in the floor of the ocean. Okay, there's this like puffer fish that makes these really cool designs. It is one of the coolest things to watch, one of those satisfying video type things. Okay, so definitely check out this video. I have the link on here, so definitely take a look at it. It is mind ballooning. Check it out. Anyways, gotta keep moving on. We got one more type of symmetry to talk about, and that is asymmetry, which is actually the lack of symmetry, okay? It just means it's not there. It's not bilaterally symmetrical. It's not radially symmetrical, man, words, okay? But it, is balanced sometimes, I guess. But you can really tell if something's not symmetrical just by, putting a line down the middle. Is it the same on both sides? No, then it's probably not symmetrical. Okay, that's just the way it is. Like these funky glasses or this really, really cool door. Okay, they just lack that symmetry. Now, just because something doesn't have symmetry does not mean that it lacks balance, okay? And we're going to be talking more about how balance and symmetry are visually different in our couple examples that I have for you, okay? And speaking of examples in art history, I have our first one, and it is a self-portrait by Frida Kahlo, painted in 1940. Now, a couple of things I want you to know about Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo created a whole bunch of self-portraits, okay? She's quoted saying that, she knows herself the best, so that's why she painted herself a lot. And she had a lot of traumatizing, sad things that happened in her life, and she ended up being bedridden a lot, okay? So she was stuck in bed for months on end, and she used paints and canvases and painting kind of passed the time. And what she painted was herself and her emotions and processing all of these things that she was going through. So she has some really unique, very cool pieces. So if you have an opportunity to check more of them out, definitely do so. She has really cool stuff. But why are we focusing on this one for balance? Okay. Well, that's a question that I have for you. Okay. If you take a look at it, does it have balance? Or maybe the first thing you want to go for is, does it have symmetry? Okay. Is there an even distribution of the art elements in here? Okay. Even amount of colors on both sides, or could I draw a line down the middle of it and it could be balanced on both sides? Is it something that I can rotate? Okay, what kind of symmetry does it possess? What I was kind of thinking is I was leaning more towards the bilateral symmetry. Now, hear me out, okay? Um, I know it's not perfect on both sides, okay? I notice that there's a monkey on one side and a cat on the other side, okay? It's totally not 100% bilaterally symmetrical, okay? But by drawing this line down the middle, it helps us identify how this is a very good example of balance, okay? So when I talk about balance, I'm talking about an even distribution of, let's say, color. Do you see something black and big on the left-hand side? Do you see something on the right-hand side that is also pretty big and black, taking about as much space? Yes. Okay. What about green? Is there about the same amount of green leaves on both sides? Yes. Okay. Look at the thorn necklace that she has. Is it perfectly, symmetrical? No. Is there about the same amount of, thorny necklaceness on either side of her? Yes. Okay, so there's small things like that that aren't 100% perfect on either side, but the visual weight, the amount of certain colors or how big objects are on both sides balances out really nice. So, um, if we have the question, does it have balance? I would have to say yes. Yes, it does. Now, if we're talking about symmetry, okay, so we have to choose between a bilateral, radial, or asymmetry. Which one do we think fits the best? Kind of bilateral. Okay, if you draw the line down the middle, it's pretty close. You got half her face on each side. You got a big block of black on each side, big block of green on each side. Pretty close. Not perfect, but it's pretty close. And we'll stick with that and we'll keep moving on. The second image I want to share with you is actually by James Whistler in 1871. And this is a portrait of his mother. And he painted his mother because the person he was supposed to paint that day did not show up. He's like, "Hey, Mom, you want me to paint a painting of you?" And she's like, "Sure, why not?" So he put her on a chair so she didn't have to stand up for that long because she was getting kind of old. Okay. But enough of backstory. How does this fit in with our whole idea of balance? Okay. Is it bilaterally symmetrical? No, if it was, it probably looks something like this. This is kind of interesting picture. Is it radial? Well, if it was more radial, it probably looks something like this. That's also kind of interesting, but does not fit what we are looking for. Okay. So what kind of symmetry is this? Okay. And if it doesn't have bilateral or radial symmetry, does it still have balance? Is this a good example of balance? Well, does it have balance? First question. The answer is yes. Okay. And hear me out as I explain why. Okay. Balance, we're talking about the visual weight of things. Okay. Now we have this big dark area, which is her dress, her outfit. And that's, a really heavy dark space. Okay. And if we did not have that white photo in the background, I think that this would be a very unbalanced image. It'd be very heavy on the bottom of this painting. Now, because of this very small but very bright, like square we have there, that kind of balances out, okay? Small, bright, heavy, big, and dark, and they actually cancel each other out, which is pretty awesome in this image, okay? Even though that rectangle in the background is so bright, it actually isn't always the focal point. Okay, we kind of have this circular motion, looking at her face, looking at the piece, going down the curtain, looking at her face, going at the piece. So we're still constantly looking at the center of the image, but not specifically at that rectangle in the background. So I think that it has balance. You can go against me if you feel like it, but in my eyes, this is a great example of balance. Okay. Now, symmetry, on the other hand, no, it doesn't. It has asymmetry, okay? You saw our examples of making it bilateral and radial. It looked pretty cool, but it wasn't the original. So, nope, it is an asymmetrical work, but it still has balance. The third one I have for you is a work by Jackson Pollock, and this was created in 1950. And Jackson Pollock, he did a style of painting called action painting, okay? And it looks to you like splatter painting, but, he did not have this canvas up on the wall and just like, yeet his paint at it from his brush, okay? What happened is he had this huge fabric canvas on the floor, and he suspended himself with a rope from the ceiling and then used his brush and carried a bucket of like house paint with him, and he would drizzle it on the painting, and he would swivel around above the painting with that little harness and rope hanging from the ceiling, so then he'd be able to cover such a huge work of art. Okay, and that's why his work is really unique, is the process in which he used to make it. Okay, now a couple questions for you. Okay. Does this work have balance? Okay. Now think about what balance is. Okay. It is the, sort of like even distribution or that even visual weight of elements. Okay. So let's go through our elements of art. Is there an even distribution of like lines or shapes or colors? Okay. Those are the big ones. Okay. I would say yes. Okay, so there's a couple different colors that he uses in this image. He has black, he has a white, he has this weird pink color, he has this weird blue color, and it's kind of like a yellowish, okay? And there's about the same amount of each of those colors throughout the whole piece, okay? There isn't a section in which there is absolutely like, no black. If you look at like in halves, okay, there's not one half that has more black than the other. There's not one half of the painting that has more pink than the other or blue than the other. It's all pretty even. Is it perfect? Like I could fold it in half and it would match? No. Okay, it's asymmetrical. Okay, so it lacks that perfection, okay, of bilateral symmetry, but it has that balance. Okay, nice and even. That's why nothing really sticks out. There's no focal point, and that's what makes his work also very interesting. Now this one, oh, it's one of my favorites. Okay, so this is the rose window in Notre Dame Cathedral, which was built in 1345. Okay, and I have a story for you. So, of I was in Boston in April of 2019. My sister was running the marathon there, and one of those days we were there, I was in the hotel and I turned on the TV and it said that Notre Dame Cathedral, this, you know, super old 700-year-old cathedral, Gothic cathedral, beautiful, beautiful. If you don't know what it looks like, Google it, okay? It caught fire. The whole roof gone. Many of the things inside destroyed, smoke damage. Oh my goodness. I was crying, okay? You can laugh at me, but I was crying. It is a huge part of art history, Notre Dame Cathedral, okay? It's an amazing structure of Gothic architecture. It has some of the most beautiful stained glass windows, which is what you're looking at here. And oh, man, it broke my heart. But I have some mean respect for, and I have a link for it on here, for the movie, not the movie, the video game Assassin's Creed. If you have never heard of it, now's a great time to know of it, okay? But the Assassin's Creed video game is a video game in which the assassin goes in different time periods and you explore that time period in a specific city and stuff like that. And one of them takes place in Paris, which is where Notre Dame Cathedral is. And they are using this video game to help reconstruct Notre Dame Cathedral, which is crazy, okay? Because the designers for Assassin's Creed have perfect, accurate measurements of the cathedral in their video game. And so they're able to use the imagery of what it looks like in that video game to help them rebuild the roof and the interior of the cathedral. So, mad respect, Assassin's Creed. I'm not a big video gamer, but I am an Assassin's Creed lover now just for this fact. Anyways, segue back into how this is a great example of balance. If you have more questions about Notre Dame Cathedral, just let me know, okay? Check out that video. It talks about Assassin's Creed. Super dope. Anyways, when we look at this work of art, there's one type of balance that really strikes me, okay? Now, think about it, okay? We have bilateral symmetry, we have radial symmetry, and we have asymmetry. So when we talk about bilateral symmetry, we talk about folding in half. Could I fold this in half and both sides would line up pretty close? Looking at the big shapes and general colors of this image, okay? I'd say yes, yes. What about radial symmetry? Could I slice it up like a pizza and then rotate it bit by bit and it would line up pretty close? Well, let's take a look at it. Would be my central axis, okay, right there in the center. And using some nice dotted lines, I'm chunking it up into some really nice pizza slices. Now, if you look at each individual pizza slice, what makes up each slice is very similar, okay? You have a circle and you have that sort of, you know, wedge kind of piece that heads towards the center, okay? And that repeats over and over and over again, okay? Another way to think about it, okay? Remember I said with radial symmetry, there's a whole rotation thing going on? As I rotate this, it would line up, okay, if I pause it in the middle. Sorry for that. But does it have balance? Okay, is there a visual weight that is very even and satisfying? The answer is absolutely. Okay, and does it have symmetry? Well, by spinning it around and being obnoxious like that, we have confirmed that yes, it indeed has radial symmetry. So, super cool. Check out Notre Dame Cathedral. Beautiful. Now, this is the artist that I really want to share with you. His name is Joe Mangrum, and he is a sand painter. And we are going to be checking out this video and the links in the description below and tying him in and understanding how his work connects with our whole idea of balance and symmetry. So check out that video. Otherwise, That is all I have for you when we talk about the principle of balance. So stay tuned for more of these videos and stay tuned for what we're going to be working on in class.